The morning mist rolled across Fort Bragg's main compound as 10-year-old Emma Grace Carter walked beside her father through the sprawling military installation. Her small hands gripped a weathered canvas bag that contained something most adults would find impossible to believe. At barely 4 feet tall, Emma moved with an unusual stillness that made veteran soldiers pause and take notice. Though most assumed it was the quiet dignity that seemed to follow military children, who had learned early that their behavior reflected on their families. Staff Sergeant Michael Carter glanced down at his daughter with a mixture of pride and protective concern. At 38, his scarred hands and alert eyes marked him as someone who had seen combat in places most civilians couldn't pronounce. His dress uniform displayed ribbons and badges that told stories of service in Iraq and Afghanistan. But what mattered most to him now was providing stability for Emma after losing her mother 2 years ago in a training accident. The decision to remain in the Army after Captain Sarah Carter's death had been about maintaining the only life Emma had ever known. Military bases were her neighborhood, commissaries were her shopping centers, and the sound of helicopters was her lullaby. Michael understood that taking her away from this environment would mean losing the last connections to her mother's memory. "Remember what we discussed, sweetheart?" Michael said quietly as they approached the base headquarters where he needed to submit quarterly training reports. "Some people might not understand why you want to use the range today." Emma's hand moved instinctively to touch the small gold wings pinned to her jacket collar, a miniature pilot's badge that had belonged to her mother. Today marked exactly 2 years since Captain Sarah Carter had died in a helicopter crash during a routine training mission. Emma had spent weeks gathering courage to ask permission to honor her mother's memory at the shooting range where Sarah had once held the base record for precision marksmanship. "I understand, Dad," Emma replied with the careful formality that military children learned early. "But Mom would have wanted me to keep practicing what she taught me." The headquarters building buzzed with typical Tuesday morning activity as personnel grabbed coffee before reporting to their various duties. The building's traditional military decor created an atmosphere that felt both institutional and oddly comforting to Emma, who had grown up surrounded by such reminders of service and sacrifice. Near the main briefing room, a group of Special Forces operators had gathered around Colonel Richard Stone, who was entertaining them with stories from his weekend hunting trip. At 52, Stone commanded attention through physical presence and the kind of loud confidence that came from 28 years of military service in increasingly administrative roles. His broad chest and thick arms gave him the appearance of someone who spent considerable time maintaining his fitness standards, while his perfectly pressed uniform suggested a man more comfortable with paperwork than field work. "So there I was, perfect shot lined up on this 8-point buck," Stone was saying, his voice carrying easily across the briefing area. "When this amateur hunter in the group ahead starts telling me I'm aiming too high. 28 years in the Army and some weekend warrior thinks he knows better than a colonel." The Special Forces operators around him chuckled appropriately. A mix of active duty personnel who understood the importance of showing respect for senior officers' stories, regardless of their entertainment value. Among them stood Sergeant First Class Jake Mitchell, a 31-year-old with an easy smile who had recently returned from deployment, and Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, 26, and still adjusting to the unique culture of special operations. After transferring from regular infantry, Stone's storytelling was interrupted when his gaze fell on Emma, who had wandered slightly away from her father to examine a display case containing historical military artifacts near the headquarters entrance. The sight of the small figure studying combat memorabilia with obvious fascination seemed to trigger something in Stone's expression, his features shifting from amiable storytelling mode to something more critical and disapproving. Well, Stone said loudly enough to draw attention from other personnel. "What do we have here?" Emma looked up from the display case, immediately recognizing the tone of voice that adults used when they were about to say something unpleasant. She had heard it often enough in the 2 years since her mother's death. Usually from people who thought they knew better than a child what constituted appropriate behavior for someone her age. The gold wings on her collar caught the morning light, filtering through the headquarters windows, creating small reflections that danced across the polished floor. Stone approached with the deliberate stride of someone accustomed to intimidating subordinates, his polished combat boots clicking against the tile floor with military precision. "Little girl, you know this is a military headquarters, right? Not a museum for tourists." The question was clearly designed to embarrass rather than seek an actual response. Emma felt heat rising in her cheeks, but maintained the kind of steady eye contact her mother had taught her was essential when facing down bullies, whether they wore uniforms or not. "Yes, sir. I know where I am," Emma replied with careful politeness. "My father is submitting his quarterly reports to Major Williams. I was just waiting for him. And what exactly are you carrying in that bag?" Stone continued, his voice taking on the kind of parade ground authority that made nearby conversations fall silent. "Looks pretty serious for a little girl's belongings." Staff Sergeant Carter heard his daughter's voice and immediately abandoned his conversation with Major Williams to move toward what was clearly becoming a confrontation. But Emma's response came before he could intervene, her voice carrying across the briefing area with surprising clarity. "It's not belongings, sir. It's my shooting equipment." The statement drew murmurs from the Special Forces operators who had gathered to watch Stone's performance. Some recognizing the serious tone in the girl's voice, while others seemed amused by what they assumed was childhood fantasy. Stone's expression showed no softening at this information. If anything, it seemed to harden further, as though Emma's claim to possess shooting equipment made her presence in the headquarters more inappropriate, rather than less. "Shooting equipment," Stone repeated with theatrical skepticism. "And I suppose Daddy lets you play with real weapons too." Before Emma could respond, Michael Carter reached the group with the kind of controlled urgency that suggested violence was being actively suppressed. "Colonel Stone," he said carefully, his voice carrying just enough edge to indicate that courtesy was being extended rather than naturally felt. "I think there might be some misunderstanding here." Stone turned his attention to Michael, taking in the staff sergeant rank and drawing immediate conclusions about social hierarchy and military status. The colonel's expression suggested someone encountering an insect that had wandered into an inappropriate location. "No misunderstanding at all, Carter," Stone said with dismissive authority. "Your daughter is in a military headquarters talking about shooting equipment like she's some kind of marksman. That's inappropriate behavior that reflects poorly on military families." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Michael found himself caught between the desire to protect his daughter and the practical reality that Stone's position could make their lives significantly more difficult if handled poorly. The housing allowances and base privileges that provided their livelihood depended on maintaining positive relationships with command personnel. "Sir," Michael said with forced calm, "Emma has been trained in proper firearm safety and marksmanship. Her mother was Captain Sarah Carter, and she started teaching Emma when she was 6 years old." "Sarah Carter," Stone said slowly, as though the name meant nothing to him. "Can't say I'm familiar with any Captain Carter. What was her job?" "Motor pool communications." The casual dismissal of Sarah's service hit both Michael and Emma like a physical blow. Captain Sarah Carter had been one of the Army's most accomplished helicopter pilots before her death, with combat decorations and flight hours that remained impressive even 2 years after her funeral. For Stone to suggest she had been anything less than an elite aviator demonstrated either ignorance or deliberate disrespect. "My mother was a helicopter pilot," Emma said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of controlled emotion that made several nearby operators shift uncomfortably. "She taught me everything she knew about precision shooting." Stone's laugh was sharp and dismissive, echoing off the headquarters' vaulted ceiling like the crack of a whip. A helicopter pilot, right? And I suppose she was some kind of hero, too, saving the world with her amazing flying skills. Master Sergeant Carlos Rodriguez had been sitting at a nearby desk, reviewing range schedules for the week while nursing his morning coffee. At 43, Rodriguez served as the base's senior marksmanship instructor, and his trained ear had caught enough of the conversation to understand that someone was making claims about shooting training. Rodriguez's professional curiosity was piqued, but his expression grew more serious as he realized the conversation was taking on an increasingly confrontational tone. Colonel Rodriguez said respectfully as he approached the group, "I couldn't help but overhear the discussion about marksmanship training. Is there something I can assist with?" Stone turned toward Rodriguez with obvious irritation at having his demonstration interrupted. "Master Sergeant Rodriguez, this little girl claims her mother was some kind of army pilot and that she's been trained to shoot. I was just explaining to her father that children shouldn't be making up stories about military service." Rodriguez looked between Stone and Emma, noting the girl's composed demeanor and the serious way she held herself. In his years as a shooting instructor, Rodriguez had learned to distinguish between genuine training and childhood fantasies. Something about Emma's bearing suggested the former rather than the latter. Miss Carter, Rodriguez said directly to Emma, "What kind of training have you received?" Emma straightened slightly, recognizing that she was being addressed by someone who understood firearms training. "Basic weapons, safety, sight alignment, breathing techniques, trigger control, and range estimation. My mother started with fundamentals and worked up to precision shooting at various distances." The technical accuracy of Emma's response impressed Rodriguez, who was accustomed to dealing with adult soldiers who often struggled to articulate basic marksmanship principles. The girl's mature approach to discussing firearms training suggested either exceptional instruction or natural understanding that went beyond casual exposure. "And what's your experience with different weapon systems?" Rodriguez asked, his professional interest overriding the social awkwardness of the situation. "I've trained primarily with M4 rifles and some pistol platforms," Emma replied without hesitation. "Mom said consistency was more important than variety until the fundamentals were completely automatic." Command Sergeant Major Patricia Woods had entered the headquarters during this exchange, drawn by reports of unusual activity involving family members and weapons training discussions. At 45, Woods had established herself as one of the Army's premier training supervisors with deployment experience that included tours in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Her reputation for excellence transcended traditional boundaries in the male-dominated world of military training. Woods approached the group with the measured last stride of someone accustomed to evaluating situations before taking action. Her eyes moved quickly over the assembled personnel before settling on Emma with obvious professional interest. Something about the girl's posture and the way she discussed firearms training triggered recognition in Woods's memory. "Captain Sarah Carter," Woods said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to be heard by the immediate group. "Call sign Angel 7, 3rd Aviation Regiment. Best natural pilot I ever worked with, and one hell of a shot with any weapon you put in her hands." The identification hit Michael Carter like an electric shock, confirming not only that Woods had known his wife, but that she remembered Sarah's call sign and unit designation with a kind of precision that indicated significant professional respect. Emma's eyes widened as she realized she was meeting someone who had actually served with her mother in combat operations. "You knew her," Emma said, her voice barely above a whisper, but carrying across the suddenly quiet briefing area. "I knew her," Woods confirmed, her expression softening as she studied Emma's features and recognized unmistakable family resemblance. She could put rounds on target from positions that would challenge most trained snipers. "Your mother saved lives with those skills." Stone's confident demeanor faltered slightly as Woods' testimony contradicted his dismissive assumptions about Sarah Carter's military service. The colonel found himself in the uncomfortable position of having publicly questioned the service of a decorated veteran while a subject matter expert provided contradictory evidence. "Command Sergeant Major," Stone said carefully, "I wasn't aware you had served with supposed pilot personnel who claimed exceptional shooting abilities." The word "supposed" carried enough edge that Woods' expression hardened noticeably. "Colonel, there was nothing supposed about Captain Carter's service. She was killed in action during a training mission that I cannot discuss in detail. But her sacrifice was in service to preparing pilots who would go on to save countless lives in combat zones." The confirmation of Sarah's distinguished service record from someone with Woods' credentials fundamentally altered the context of the confrontation. Stone found himself facing the reality that he had been publicly mocking the daughter of a decorated veteran while demonstrating ignorance about personnel who had served under his overall command structure. Emma felt validation washing over her, like a tide, confirming everything she had been taught to believe about her mother's service and sacrifice. Having someone with Command Sergeant Major Woods' obvious expertise acknowledge Sarah's abilities provided the kind of official recognition that had been missing from 2 years of private grief and memory. "Command Sergeant Major," Emma said with growing confidence, "would it be possible for me to use the shooting range today? I'd like to honor my mother's memory by maintaining the skills she taught me." The request was made with such sincere respect that it took Stone several seconds to process the implications. When understanding dawned, his expression shifted to something between amusement and outright mockery at what he perceived as a child's presumptuous demand for access to military training facilities. "Oh, really?" Stone said with elaborate sarcasm. "The little girl wants to play soldier on a real military range. What's next? Maybe she thinks she can qualify for special forces training too." The cruel dismissal created a moment of uncomfortable silence as everyone present recognized that Stone was crossing lines of basic decency in his treatment of a military family member. Several operators shifted uncomfortably, their expressions suggesting growing unease with their colonel's handling of what should have been a simple family matter. Wood stepped forward with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of training elite personnel under the most demanding conditions. "Colonel, if Miss Carter has been properly trained in firearm safety and marksmanship, there's no regulation preventing her from using base facilities under appropriate supervision." "Are you seriously suggesting," Stone said with obvious disbelief, "that we allow a 10-year-old girl to use military weapons based on her claims about training from her dead mother?" The brutally dismissive reference to Sarah's death created a reaction that rippled through the assembled group like an electric shock. Michael Carter's hands clenched into fists as he struggled to maintain the kind of control that separated civilization from violence, while Emma's composure showed signs of strain for the first time since the confrontation began. "Colonel Stone," Woods said with dangerous quiet, "I suggest you reconsider both your tone and your assumptions about Miss Carter's capabilities." Before Stone could respond to what was clearly a warning from a senior enlisted person to a commissioned officer, Emma made a decision that would change everything for everyone present. "Colonel Stone," she said with a kind of calm certainty that cut through all the adult posturing and institutional politics, "if you don't believe my mother taught me anything useful, I'd be happy to demonstrate what I learned." The offer was made with such straightforward sincerity that it took Stone several seconds to understand that a 10-year-old girl was challenging him to put his skepticism to a practical test. When the implications became clear, his expression shifted to something approaching cruel delight as he recognized an opportunity to decisively humiliate both the Carter family and anyone who had suggested taking the girl's claims seriously. "You know what?" Stone said with the kind of theatrical enthusiasm that typically preceded someone's public destruction. "I think that's an excellent idea. Let's see exactly what kind of training a little girl received from her supposedly expert mother." Master Sergeant Rodriguez felt his professional obligations colliding with his growing discomfort about the direction this confrontation was heading. "Colonel, if we're going to do this, it needs to be under proper safety protocols with appropriate supervision." "Absolutely," Stone agreed with obvious satisfaction. "Full safety protocols, proper supervision, and witnesses to document exactly what happens when children try to play with adult weapons." Woods caught Emma's eye and saw in the girl's expression the same focused determination that had characterized Sarah Carter's approach to impossible challenges. "Miss Carter, are you certain you want to do this? Once we get to the range, there won't be any backing down." Emma looked up at her father, seeing in his expression the same conflict that had defined much of their relationship since Sarah's death. Michael wanted to protect her from exactly this kind of public scrutiny, but he also understood that backing down now would validate every dismissive assumption Stone had made about their family's military legacy. "Dad," Emma said quietly, "it's okay. I want to do this." Michael studied his daughter's face, seeing in her features the same determined expression that Sarah had worn when facing impossible odds in situations where failure meant mission compromise. The resemblance was so strong it made his chest tighten with grief and pride in equal measure. "All right," Michael nodded slowly, then turned toward Stone with a new edge in his voice that suggested the colonel might want to reconsider his assumptions. "Let's go to the range." As the impromptu group began moving toward the headquarters exit, Emma walked beside Command Sergeant Major Woods, with obvious eagerness to learn from someone who had known her mother personally. She was about to demonstrate abilities that most people would find difficult to believe. But for Emma, it felt like coming home to something that had always been part of her identity. The morning sun was beginning to burn off the remaining mist as they stepped outside, revealing the sprawling Fort Bragg training complex stretching toward distant tree lines. In a few minutes, Emma would be standing at the firing range with a rifle in her hands, finally given the opportunity to honor her mother's memory in the most meaningful way. She knew how. Stone's laughter echoed across the base courtyard as he shared predictions about the upcoming humiliation he was about to deliver to the Carter family with anyone within earshot. He had no idea that he was walking toward a demonstration that would fundamentally challenge everything he thought he knew about talent, respect, and the true meaning of military excellence. The shooting range sprawled across a natural clearing between two training areas, its concrete firing positions and steel target frameworks creating geometric patterns against the North Carolina pine forest. The facility could accommodate everything from basic pistol qualification to advanced sniper training, with lanes extending from 25 meters out to an impressive 600 meters through terrain that connected Fort Bragg's main post to the broader Special Operations Training Complex. The unusual procession walking toward the range attracted curious glances from personnel conducting routine maintenance and training activities. Command Sergeant Major Woods led the group with the purposeful stride of someone who had spent years moving between combat zones and training facilities, while Colonel Stone maintained his position of authority through sheer physical presence and increasingly loud commentary about what he expected to witness. "I want everyone to understand," Stone announced to the growing crowd of followers, "that we're not here to encourage dangerous behavior. We're here to demonstrate why children don't belong around military weapons, regardless of what fantasies their families might have developed." Captain Jennifer Walsh had joined the group during their walk from headquarters, drawn by radio chatter about unusual range activity involving family members. At 34, Walsh had recently completed Advanced Marksmanship Instructor certification and possessed the kind of technical knowledge that made her valuable for evaluating shooting performance under various conditions. Colonel Walsh said respectfully, "If we're conducting an evaluation, should we establish specific criteria for success or failure?" The question caught Stone off guard. He hadn't considered that Emma might actually demonstrate competence that would require objective measurement. His expectation of complete failure hadn't included provisions for partial success or qualified performance that might complicate his narrative about civilian incompetence. Captain Stone replied after a moment of calculation, "I think we'll know success when we see it. Or in this case, we'll know failure when it becomes obvious to everyone present." Emma walked between her father and Command Sergeant Major Woods, absorbing technical details about the range layout and safety procedures that Woods provided in a quiet, professional tone. The information was delivered without condescension or artificial encouragement, treating Emma as someone capable of understanding complex concepts rather than a child who needed simplified explanations. "The wind patterns here can be tricky," Woods explained as they approached the range control building. "The morning thermals from the forest create unpredictable drafts that change throughout the day. Your mother and I spent hours learning to read the flag indicators and vegetation movement." "Mom taught me about mirage and heat shimmer," Emma replied, her voice carrying the kind of technical precision that impressed Walsh, who had been listening to their conversation with growing professional interest. She said environmental conditions were more important than equipment quality for consistent accuracy. Major David Thompson had been conducting routine inspections of range safety equipment when he spotted the approaching group that included more personnel than typically accompanied standard training activities. At 41, Thompson commanded one of the base's training battalions and possessed combat experience that included multiple deployments to Afghanistan, where marksmanship skills determine mission success. Command Sergeant Major Woods, Thompson called out as the group reached the range entrance. "I understand we have some kind of special demonstration planned." Woods nodded acknowledgement while maintaining her focus on preparing Emma for what was about to become a very public test of abilities that had been developed in private. Major Miss Carter would like to honor her mother's memory by demonstrating the marksmanship training she received. Thompson's expression grew more serious as he processed this information. Range safety was always a primary concern, but the presence of a child introduced variables that weren't covered in standard operating procedures. Miss Carter Thompson said carefully, "What's your experience level with military weapon systems?" "I've been training since I was 6, Emma answered. "Directly?" "Basic safety protocols, breathing techniques, sight alignment, trigger control, and environmental compensation. My mother emphasized fundamentals before moving to advanced techniques." The comprehensive nature of Emma's training impressed Thompson, who was accustomed to dealing with adult soldiers who often needed extensive remedial instruction in basic marksmanship principles. "What's the longest shot you've successfully made?" Thompson asked. Emma considered the question carefully before responding. 300 meters with an M4 rifle using iron sights. "But that was 4 months ago, and I've grown since then. So, my sight picture and body position might be different now." The casual mention of making a 300-meter shot with iron sights drew sharp attention from everyone present who possessed sufficient technical knowledge to understand the difficulty of such an achievement. Thompson found himself reassessing his initial assumptions about the girl's claimed abilities. While Stone's expression showed the first signs of uncertainty about his predictions, Sergeant First Class Alex Martinez had been observing this preliminary evaluation from his position near the range control tower. At 38, Martinez had established himself as one of the Army's most experienced marksmanship instructors, with a reputation for developing struggling shooters into competent marksmen through patient instruction and attention to individual learning styles. "Major Thompson," Martinez said as he approached the group, "if we're going to evaluate civilian shooting abilities, we should follow modified safety protocols that account for age and experiences." Thompson recognized the wisdom in Martinez's recommendation. understanding that child-specific safety measures would protect both Emma and the institutional credibility of everyone involved in the demonstration. Sergeant Martinez, I want you to conduct a preliminary safety evaluation before we allow any weapons handling. Understood, sir, Martinez replied, then turned toward Emma with the kind of patient professionalism that had made him effective with thousands of students over his career. Miss Carter, I need to verify your knowledge of basic weapons safety. Before we proceed, the next 15 minutes, Martinez conducted an informal but thorough evaluation of Emma's understanding of fundamental safety principles, range procedures, and emergency protocols. Her responses revealed not only comprehensive theoretical knowledge, but practical experience that went far beyond casual exposure to firearms training. Weapon condition checks, Martinez said, testing Emma's knowledge of critical safety procedures. Visual inspection of chamber and magazine. Followed by physical verification with chamber flag or finger check, Emma replied without hesitation. Never assume a weapon is safe based on someone else's confirmation. Malfunction procedures. Stop. Maintain muzzle discipline. Engage safety if possible. Signal range safety officer for assistance. Never attempt to clear complex malfunctions without supervision. Environmental safety considerations. Backstop verification. Range boundaries. Personnel locations. Ricochet potential from hard surfaces or angled targets. Each answer demonstrated the kind of comprehensive training that typically required months of instruction to develop. Martinez found himself increasingly impressed by the depth and accuracy of Emma's knowledge, recognizing teaching methods that reflected both expertise and careful attention to student development. Miss Carter, Martinez concluded, your safety knowledge exceeds that of many adult students I've worked with. Who provided your instruction? My mother, Emma replied simply. She said that safety was more important than accuracy because mistakes with weapons can't be undone. The mature understanding implicit in Emma's response impressed everyone present who understood the psychological complexity of handling lethal equipment responsibly. As the group moved toward the actual firing positions, Emma opened her canvas bag to reveal a collection of shooting accessories that impressed the military professionals present. The bag contained hearing protection, shooting glasses, a notebook, with range data and various tools for equipment maintenance. Everything was organized with military precision and showed signs of regular use rather than ceremonial display. That's professional-grade equipment, Captain Walsh observed quietly to Major Thompson. Not the kind of accessories you'd expect from casual recreational shooting. Thompson nodded agreement while studying the systematic way Emma prepared her. Equipment for use. Someone invested significant time and money in her training setup. Command Sergeant Major Woods had been watching Emma's preparation routine with obvious professional interest, recognizing methods and habits that reflected her mother's systematic approach to marksmanship training. Sarah always said that proper preparation was half of accurate shooting, Woods commented. Equipment checks, environmental assessment, and mental preparation before touching the weapon. The range itself stretched across carefully, maintained grounds that provided clear sightlines and controlled lighting conditions for precision shooting. Target frames stood at measured intervals, their distances marked with signs that indicated both metric and yard measurements for NATO training compatibility. The morning sun had completely eliminated the mist, revealing optimal visibility conditions that would remove environmental excuses for poor performance. Sergeant Martinez had been preparing equipment and targets while the preliminary evaluations were conducted. As senior range instructor, his primary responsibility was ensuring that all activities followed established protocols while maintaining the flexibility necessary to accommodate unusual training situations. We'll start with basic familiarization. At 25 meters, Martinez announced after completing his preparation checklist. Standard target, supported position, 5 rounds for initial assessment. Stone positioned himself where he could observe both Emma's shooting technique and the target results, anticipating the moment when reality would deflate the girl's pretensions and validate his assessment of the situation. His confidence remained high despite the professional preparation surrounding the demonstration, as he couldn't conceive of a 10-year-old girl possessing skills that rivaled those of trained military personnel. "I want everyone to understand," Stone declared to the assembled observers, "that we're witnessing exactly why the military has age and training requirements. Natural talent doesn't replace proper instruction and experience." Emma had been listening to these pronouncements while conducting her own environmental assessment of wind conditions, lighting, and range setup, her systematic approach to evaluating shooting conditions impressed the military professionals present, who recognized behaviors that reflected serious training rather than childhood enthusiasm. "The thermal activity is minimal this morning," Emma observed to Command Sergeant Major Woods. "Wind flags indicate consistent movement from the east at approximately 2 miles per hour. Should be favorable conditions for precision work." Woods smiled slightly at Emma's technical assessment, remembering similar conversations with Sarah Carter. In far more dangerous environments where such observations determine mission success or failure. "Your mother would be proud of your situational awareness." As Martinez completed the final safety checks and target setup, Emma settled into a supported prone position behind the M4 rifle that had been selected for the initial demonstration. Her body alignment and weapon handling showed none of the hesitation or uncertainty that typically characterized first-time shooters, instead displaying the fluid competence that came from hundreds of hours of careful practice. The silence that settled over the firing range held the weight of institutional skepticism and family honor as Emma Carter prepared to demonstrate whether her mother's legacy lived on through more than just memory and gold wings. In a few moments, the sharp crack of rifle fire would either validate years of private training or confirm Colonel Stone's assumption that children had no place among warriors. Asterisk. The silence that descended over the Fort Bragg firing range carried the weight of expectation and disbelief as Emma Carter adjusted her cheek, welled against the M for stock, through the rifle's iron sights. The target 25 meters downrange appeared crisp and clear, its black bullseye standing out against the white background like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The morning breeze had stilled to barely a whisper, creating ideal conditions that would eliminate any environmental excuses for poor performance. "Take your time, Miss Carter," Sergeant Martinez said quietly from his position as range safety officer. "There's no rush, and remember that everyone here wants you to succeed safely." Emma's breathing had already settled into the controlled rhythm her mother had drilled into her during countless weekend training sessions. The 4-count cycle that Captain Sarah Carter had learned in flight school and adapted for precision shooting. Inhale fully, exhale halfway, hold, squeeze that the trigger press was smooth and deliberate, breaking cleanly with the kind of technique that typically required months of intensive training to develop properly. The sharp crack of the rifle shot echoed off the surrounding pine forest, followed immediately by the distinctive ping of a bullet striking steel. Through his binoculars, Major Thompson observed the target with professional assessment, his expression shifting from polite interest to genuine surprise as he announced his findings. "Dead center bullseye," Thompson called out, his voice carrying clearly across the range. "Clean hit, textbook placement." Colonel Stone had positioned himself where he could watch both Emma's technique and the target results, expecting to witness the kind of scattered shots that would validate his assumptions about children attempting adult activities. The single-centered hit was impressive, but hardly conclusive evidence of exceptional ability that couldn't be attributed to beginner's luck. "One shot proves nothing," Stone declared with confident dismissal. "Anyone can get lucky once with proper equipment and favorable conditions." Command Sergeant Major Woods stepped forward with the calm authority that came from years of training. Elite soldiers under combat conditions. Miss Carter, would you be comfortable firing a complete qualification string? 5 rounds, standard scoring, measured group size. Yes, ma'am, Emma replied, without lifting her eye from the sight picture. The formal military address drew approving nods from the personnel present, demonstrating respect for rank that went beyond surface politeness and reflected genuine understanding of military culture. What followed silenced every T. What followed silenced every skeptical comment and a dismissive prediction that had been voiced since the confrontation began at headquarters. Emma's second shot struck within inches of the first, followed by 3 more rounds that created a grouping so tight it appeared to be a single enlarged hole in the target center ring. The precision was so consistent that several observers initially suspected a malfunction with the target system. Sergeant Martinez lowered his binoculars with an expression of professional amazement that he made no attempt to conceal. 5 rounds, approximately 1-inch group at 25 meters. That exceeds expert qualification standards by any measure. The announcement created ripples of conversation among the military personnel who had gathered to witness what they expected to be a child's embarrassing failure. Sergeant Mitchell found himself reconsidering every assumption he had made about civilian training capabilities, while Staff Sergeant Rodriguez stared at the target display with the kind of awe typically reserved for watching professionals perform seemingly impossible feats. Captain Walsh moved closer to examine the target through her own optics, confirming the group size and shot placement with the systematic approach of someone trained to evaluate marksmanship performance objectively. "That's not luck," she said quietly to Sergeant Martinez. "That's fundamental skill applied with exceptional consistency." Stone's confident demeanor showed the first cracks as he processed results that directly contradicted his expectations and public predictions. The colonel found himself in the uncomfortable position of watching a 10-year-old girl demonstrate shooting abilities that exceeded those of many personnel under his command. "Fine," Stone said, with forced bravado. "She can hit a target at close range under controlled conditions, but 25 meters isn't real marksmanship. Any recruit can be taught to group shots when the target is practically close enough to touch." Dr. Sarah Kim had been observing Emma's performance with clinical interest, noting her psychological response to both success and continued skepticism. At 36, Dr. Kim served as the base psychological evaluation specialist, and the girl's emotional regulation under public scrutiny impressed. Someone whose job involved assessing personnel under various stress conditions, Colonel Dr. Kim interjected diplomatically. "Miss Carter's performance demonstrates both technical competence and appropriate stress management. Perhaps we should consider what distance would provide a more comprehensive evaluation." The question was clearly designed to put Stone in the position of either backing down from his challenge or escalating to distances where failure would be more likely and less embarrassing for everyone involved. Stone's pride wouldn't allow him to retreat from the confrontation he had initiated, regardless of the mounting evidence that his assumptions might be fundamentally flawed. "Real marksmen qualify at 300 meters, Stone announced with the kind of authority that made retreat impossible. "If she's genuinely skilled, let's see how she performs at a distance where environmental factors and technical precision actually matter." Command Sergeant Major Woods turned toward Stone with the patient expression of an instructor dealing with a particularly stubborn student who refused to acknowledge obvious evidence. "Colonel, 300-meter shooting requires different equipment, more complex sight adjustments, and environmental compensation that challenges experienced marksmen." "Exactly my point," Stone replied with satisfaction. "Let's separate genuine skill from beginner's luck by testing her abilities under conditions that require real expertise." Emma lifted her head from the rifle for the first time since beginning her demonstration, looking toward her father with a questioning expression that sought permission rather than validation. Michael Carter felt his throat tighten as he recognized in his daughter's face the same focused determination that had characterized Sarah's approach to impossible challenges in hostile environments. "Emma," Michael said quietly, "you don't have to prove anything more to anyone." "I know, Dad," she replied with gentle firmness that reminded him powerfully of her mother's voice during their final conversation before Sarah's last deployment. "But I want to show them what Mom taught me." Major Thompson found himself caught between institutional responsibility and growing curiosity about Emma's actual capabilities. The girl's performance at 25 meters had been genuinely impressive, but 300-meter shooting involved technical complexities that challenged even experienced military marksmen. "Miss Carter," Thompson said carefully, "extended-range shooting requires advanced equipment and procedures. The sight adjustments are more complex, wind becomes a significant factor, and small errors in technique are magnified dramatically." "I understand, sir," Emma replied respectfully. "My mother taught me about ballistic calculation, wind reading, and environmental compensation. She said that precision shooting was 90% mental discipline and 10% physical technique." Sergeant Martinez had been evaluating Emma's responses and demeanor throughout the initial demonstration, recognizing training methods and attitudes that reflected serious instruction rather than casual hobby shooting. "Miss Carter, what's your experience with different ammunition types and their ballistic characteristics?" The technical question was designed to test whether Emma's knowledge extended beyond basic marksmanship into the kind of advanced understanding required for precision shooting at extended distances. Her answer would indicate whether her training had been comprehensive or limited to fundamental skills. "Match-grade ammunition provides better consistency than military ball ammunition," Emma replied without hesitation. "Bullet weight affects trajectory and wind drift, with heavier bullets, generally providing better performance in crosswinds, but requiring more elevation adjustment for longer distances." The casual precision of her ballistic knowledge impressed everyone present who possessed sufficient technical background to evaluate its accuracy. Captain Walsh exchanged a meaningful glance with Major Thompson, both recognizing that Emma's understanding far exceeded what would be expected from recreational training or casual instruction. Master Sergeant Jennifer Blake had arrived at the range during the equipment preparation, drawn by radio reports of unusual training activity that involved civilian personnel and extended-range shooting. At 42, Blake served as the base's senior weapons instructor and possessed the administrative authority to shut down activities that exceeded safety protocols or created liability concerns for the installation. Sergeant Martinez, Blake said as she surveyed the scene, "I understand we have a non-standard training evolution taking place. What's the current status?" Martinez recognized the potential complications that official scrutiny could create for what had evolved from a simple demonstration into something approaching formal evaluation. "Master Sergeant, we're conducting a supervised marksmanship assessment under full safety protocols. Miss Carter has demonstrated exceptional ability at basic distances." Blake studied Emma's position behind the rifle, noting the professional setup and the number of senior personnel who had gathered to observe the demonstration. The institutional attention suggested that whatever was happening had significance beyond routine training activities. "How exceptional are we talking about?" Blake asked, her tone indicating genuine professional interest rather than bureaucratic concern. 1-inch group at 25 meters, Captain Walsh replied before anyone could downplay Emma's performance. 5 rounds, iron sights, textbook technique. The specific measurement impressed Blake, who possessed sufficient marksmanship background to understand that such precision exceeded the capabilities of most military personnel, regardless of training level or experience. Her expression shifted from administrative caution to professional curiosity about what other surprises this unusual morning might produce, as the group moved toward the 300-meter range facility. Emma walked beside Command Sergeant Major Woods with obvious eagerness to learn from someone who had worked alongside her mother in combat situations. Command Sergeant Major, did my mother ever talk about teaching me advanced marksmanship? She talked about you constantly. Woods replied with a slight smile that transformed her typically serious expression. Sarah was incredibly proud of your natural ability. But she was also concerned about ensuring you understood the ethical responsibilities that come with lethal skills. The mention of ethical considerations demonstrated that Sarah's training had extended beyond technical instruction into moral development, addressing the psychological complexity of possessing abilities that could cause harm if misused. Dr. Kim noted this aspect of Emma's background as potentially significant for evaluating her psychological readiness for advanced training opportunities. The 300-meter range stretched across a natural depression in the training area, with target frameworks positioned at precise distances and marked with range indicators that accounted for both metric and imperial measurements. The setup required more sophisticated equipment than the basic range, including wind measurement devices and spotting scopes that could accurately assess shot placement at extended distances. Colonel Stone had been observing the professional preparations with growing unease about the direction events were taking. What had begun as an opportunity to humiliate a presumptuous child was evolving into a formal evaluation that might produce results he wasn't prepared to acknowledge or accept. "I want everyone to understand," Stone announced to the growing crowd of observers, "that we're about to demonstrate exactly why military training requirements exist. Complex skills can't be learned through casual instruction, regardless of family connections or natural talent." Captain Walsh had been configuring the bolt-action rifle and variable power scope, while Sergeant Martinez established the target and safety protocols for extended range work. The equipment represented a significant step up in complexity from the basic rifle used for the initial demonstration, requiring more sophisticated sight adjustment and environmental compensation techniques. "Miss Carter," Walsh said as she completed the rifle preparation, "this system requires different sight alignment and trigger technique than the weapon you used earlier. Would you like a few minutes to familiarize yourself with the equipment?" Emma approached the rifle with the same systematic attention to detail she had demonstrated throughout the morning, examining the scope, adjustment mechanisms, and bolt operation with the kind of methodical assessment that impressed military professionals present. Her handling of the unfamiliar weapon showed confidence without recklessness, suggesting training that had emphasized adaptability rather than dependence on specific equipment. "The scope is set for 200 meters, Emma observed after examining the elevation adjustment. "I'll need to compensate for the additional 100 meters plus wind drift from the current east to west movement." The technical accuracy of her assessment drew nods of approval from the experienced marksmen present, who recognized that Emma was approaching the challenge with a kind of systematic analysis that separated competent shooters from those who relied on luck or favorable conditions. As Emma settled into position behind the scoped rifle, the assembled observers fell silent with anticipation that mixed skepticism with growing respect for abilities that had already exceeded most expectations. The target at 300 meters appeared small even through the magnified scope, its scoring rings barely visible despite optical enhancement. The morning sun had climbed higher in the North Carolina sky, creating thermal effects that would influence bullet trajectory and requiring the kind of environmental awareness that challenged even experienced marksmen. What happened next would either validate Emma's claimed abilities or expose the limitations that Colonel Stone expected to find in any civilian training program. Regardless of quality or dedication, through the scope's crosshairs, Emma could see the target wavering slightly in the thermal currents rising from the warming ground. At 300 meters, the target appeared no larger than a dinner plate through the magnified optics, its scoring rings creating concentric circles that demanded precision, beyond anything most civilian shooters ever attempted. Emma's breathing settled into the deeper rhythm required for long-range shooting, her entire focus narrowing to the complex coordination of sight alignment, trigger control, and environmental compensation. The shot that followed was preceded by several seconds of complete stillness as Emma made microscopic adjustments to her sight picture and body position. When the rifle fired, the sound seemed sharper and more authoritative than the previous demonstrations, as though the weapon itself recognized the precision being demanded of it. Through his spotting scope, Sergeant Martinez tracked the bullet's path to the target with professional interest that quickly transformed into genuine astonishment. "Dead center bullseye," Martinez announced, his voice carrying a note of disbelief that made several observers check their own optics to confirm the impossible result. "Proximate deviation from point of aim, 0." The announcement created a moment of stunned silence as the implications of Emma's performance settled over the assembled group like a revelation that challenged fundamental assumptions about talent, training, and the limitations of youth. "Major?" Thompson found himself staring at the target through his binoculars, desperately seeking some explanation for results that exceeded the capabilities of most trained snipers. "That's not possible," Stone said flatly, his voice carrying the kind of denial that people use when confronted with evidence that contradicted their core beliefs. "There must be an error in target placement or measurement." Captain Walsh had been recording shot data with the systematic precision required for official documentation, understanding that extraordinary claims required extraordinary evidence to support institutional credibility. "Colonel, the target placement has been verified by multiple observers using calibrated equipment. The shot placement is accurate as reported." Before Stone could challenge the measurement procedures, Major Thompson stepped forward with the kind of quiet authority that came from years of leading personnel in life-hand situations. "Miss Carter, would you be willing to repeat that?" "Performance. One shot doesn't constitute definitive proof of consistent ability." Emma looked up from the rifle scope with calm acceptance that suggested she had expected this challenge. "How many shots would you like me to fire, Major?" The question was asked with such straightforward confidence that it took Thompson several seconds to formulate a response that would satisfy his need for comprehensive evaluation, while maintaining realistic expectations for what any shooter could accomplish under public scrutiny. 5 rounds, Thompson decided. Standard precision shooting string, measured group size, documented conditions. "I understand," Emma replied, settling back into position with movements that had become increasingly fluid and professional as the morning progressed. 5 rounds for group measurement. What followed was a display of precision shooting that exceeded even Command Sergeant Major Woods' expectations based on her knowledge of Sarah Carter's exceptional abilities. Each shot struck within the target's center ring, creating a grouping so tight that individual bullet holes were difficult to distinguish even through high-powered optics. When Sergeant Martinez announced the final results, his voice carried the kind of professional reverence typically reserved for witnessing genuinely historic performance. 5 rounds, total group size approximately 2 inches at 300 meters. That exceeds advanced sniper qualification standards. The silence that followed this announcement was profound and uncomfortable as everyone present processed the reality that they had just witnessed a 10-year-old girl demonstrate marksmanship skills that surpassed those of elite military personnel. The implications extended far beyond simple family pride into questions about talent identification, training methods, and institutional assumptions about capability development. Colonel Stone stared at the target through his binoculars with an expression that suggested someone watching their entire worldview collapse in real time. The confident predictions he had made about civilian incompetence and childish fantasies now seemed not just wrong, but embarrassingly ignorant of capabilities that exceeded his own institutional experience. The demonstration had attracted additional personnel who had heard radio chatter about unusual range activities involving record-breaking performance. Word was spreading throughout Fort Bragg that something extraordinary was happening at the 300-meter range, and the gathering crowd included senior officers whose presence indicated that Emma's situation was generating attention at levels that could affect her entire future, as the immediate shock of Emma's performance began to settle. Command Sergeant Major Woods approached her position with obvious pride, mixed with concern about the institutional attention such abilities would inevitably attract from organizations that specialized in developing and utilizing exceptional talent for military purposes. Outstanding shooting, Miss Carter, Woods said with genuine professional admiration. Your mother would be incredibly proud of what you've accomplished today. Emma felt the validation of official recognition from someone whose expertise was beyond question, but she also sensed that her demonstration had created complications that extended far beyond honoring her mother's memory. The gathered crowd and the serious expressions of senior personnel suggested that her request for simple range access had evolved into something much more significant than anyone had anticipated. The morning sun continued its climb over Fort Bragg, as Emma Carter prepared to learn that exceptional ability often came with unexpected consequences, and that demonstrating such skills in public could open doors to opportunities she had never imagined, while simultaneously creating pressures that no 10-year-old should have to navigate alone. The unexpected sound of approaching helicopter rotors cut through the afternoon air at Fort Bragg, announcing the arrival of personnel whose presence would transform Emma's demonstration from local curiosity into something with far-reaching implications for everyone involved. The distinctive markings on the incoming aircraft indicated Pentagon authority, suggesting that reports of her extraordinary performance had somehow reached decision-makers at the highest levels of military command. Scheduled aircraft inbound, Sergeant Martinez announced after receiving radio notification from base operations. Pentagon identification codes, priority clearance. Colonel Stone watched the approaching helicopter with growing anxiety about how his handling of the situation would be characterized in official reports. His confident dismissal of Emma's abilities had been completely undermined by her performance, leaving him in the uncomfortable position of explaining why he had publicly challenged a child whose skills exceeded those of most personnel under his command. Brigadier General Patricia Harrison emerged from the aircraft with the purposeful stride of someone accustomed to commanding attention through presence rather than announcement. At 58, Harrison possessed the kind of institutional authority and decision-making power that could reshape careers with a single recommendation. Her unscheduled arrival at a training installation suggested either significant problems requiring immediate resolution or exceptional opportunities that demanded personal evaluation. Major Alexin Thompson intercepted the general's party with crisp military bearing that reflected both respect for superior authority and anxiety about explaining unusual base activities to Pentagon-level officials without advanced preparation or formal briefing materials. General Harrison Thompson said with careful formality, "Welcome to Fort Bragg. I'm Major Thompson, Training Battalion Commander. We weren't expecting your arrival, ma'am." Harrison studied Thompson's expression with the evaluating gaze of someone trained to assess institutional climate through brief interactions with personnel at various levels. "Major, I received some extraordinary reports about marksmanship activities involving civilian personnel. I need to speak with the individuals responsible immediately." The general's direct approach eliminated any possibility of bureaucratic delay, making it clear that her visit related specifically to Emma's demonstration rather than routine inspection activities. Thompson felt his stomach tighten as he realized that local training activities had somehow generated attention at the highest levels of military command. "Ma'am, the situation involves Miss Emma Carter, age 10, daughter of Staff Sergeant Michael Carter. The civilian in question has demonstrated marksmanship abilities that have attracted considerable institutional attention." Harrison's expression shifted subtly at the mention of the Carter name, suggesting either prior knowledge or recognition that went beyond the morning's reports. Carter, Sarah Carter's family. The specific reference to Emma's deceased mother indicated preparation that extended beyond casual interest in unusual training activities. Thompson found himself wondering whether Harrison's investigation had begun before or after reports of Emma's exceptional performance reached Pentagon attention. Yes, ma'am. Captain Sarah Carter was killed in a training accident 2 years ago. Her daughter has been demonstrating advanced marksmanship abilities under the supervision of Command Sergeant Major Woods. Harrison nodded acknowledgement while maintaining her focus on reaching the range where the actual participants could provide first-hand accounts rather than second-hand summaries that might be filtered through institutional bias or incomplete understanding. Major, I want immediate transport to the range. No advance notification to personnel already present. I prefer to observe situations before they're modified for official consumption. As the staff car carrying General Harrison approached the firing range, the sound of its engine drew attention from the assembled personnel, who had been discussing the implications of Emma's extraordinary shooting performance. Colonel Stone felt his anxiety intensify as he recognized that his handling of the morning's events would now receive scrutiny from someone whose opinion could affect his career trajectory significantly. Official vehicle approaching, Captain Walsh announced after spotting the car's distinctive markings and flag indicators. General Officer, unscheduled arrival. The notification created immediate tension among the military personnel present, most of whom understood that surprise visits from Pentagon officials typically indicated either serious problems or exceptional circumstances that required high-level evaluation and response. Emma had been cleaning her rifle and organizing her equipment when she noticed the change in atmosphere among the adults around her. The sudden formality and obvious nervousness suggested that someone important was about to join their group, though she couldn't understand why her shooting demonstration would attract such attention. Dad, Emma said quietly to Michael, who had been standing nearby with obvious pride, mixed with concern about the growing institutional interest in his daughter's abilities. Is something wrong? Michael recognized the signs of approaching official scrutiny that could transform their private family matter into a public institutional issue beyond their control. Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Just remember what your mother taught you about dealing with authority figures respectfully and honestly. General Harrison stepped out of the staff car and immediately began assessing the scene with professional interest that took in personnel positioning, equipment, setup, and the general atmosphere of tension that accompanied her unannounced arrival. Her gaze settled on Emma with particular attention, studying the girl's composure and bearing. Under circumstances that would challenge most adults, Major Thompson recognized his responsibility to brief the arriving general on the morning's activities, understanding that accurate information would be crucial for whatever decisions were about to be made regarding Emma's situation and future opportunities. General Harrison, Thompson said with respectful formality. I'm Major Thompson. We've been observing Miss Carter's marksmanship demonstration under controlled safety conditions. Harrison studied Thompson's expression, noting the obvious respect in his voice when referring to Emma's performance. Major, what exactly have you observed that warranted Pentagon notification? Ma'am, Miss Carter has demonstrated precision shooting that exceeds advanced sniper qualification standards. 2-inch groups at 300 meters, consistent shot placement, professional technique, and exemplary safety procedures. The specific measurements impressed Harrison, who possessed sufficient technical background to understand that such performance represented exceptional ability regardless of the shooter's age or background. Her expression grew more serious as she processed implications that extended beyond simple family pride into questions about talent identification and development programs. Where's Miss Carter now? Harrison asked, her tone indicating immediate interest in direct evaluation rather than continued second-hand reports. "Right here, ma'am," Emma said quietly, stepping forward with the kind of respectful attention that military children learned early in their development. "I'm Emma Carter." Harrison studied Emma's face with obvious professional interest, noting the composed demeanor and mature bearing that suggested capabilities beyond her chronological age. The general's expression softened slightly as she recognized the emotional complexity of a child who had lost a parent in military service. "Miss Carter," Harrison said with surprising gentleness, "I understand you've been honoring your mother's memory through marksmanship training. Your performance today has been remarkable." "Thank you, ma'am," Emma replied with careful formality. "My mother taught me that exceptional abilities come with responsibilities to use them properly." The mature response impressed Harrison, who had observed many adult personnel struggle with the ethical complexity of possessing lethal skills. Emma's understanding of moral obligations suggested training that had extended beyond technical instruction into character development. Command Sergeant Major Woods approached the group with obvious recognition of General Harrison's identity and significance, understanding that her presence indicated institutional interest that could provide opportunities far beyond anything previously available to the Carter family. General Harrison Woods said respectfully, "I served with Captain Carter during multiple deployments. Her daughter has inherited exceptional natural ability that exceeds even her mother's remarkable skills." Harrison turned toward Woods with a kind of attention that indicated professional interest in expert testimony from someone whose credibility was beyond question. "Command Sergeant Major, you've observed both mother and daughter. How would you compare their capabilities?" "Ma'am, Sarah Carter was the finest natural pilot and marksman I've ever worked with. Her daughter demonstrates the same instinctive understanding of precision shooting, but with technical knowledge that suggests more systematic training than most military personnel receive." The comparison provided context that helped Harrison understand the significance of what she was witnessing while raising questions about how such exceptional abilities should be developed and utilized within existing military frameworks. Dr. Kim had been observing Harrison's interaction with Emma, noting the general's obvious interest in psychological as well as technical aspects of the girl's development. "General, I've been conducting informal evaluation of Miss Carter's stress response and decision-making capabilities. Her psychological profile suggests exceptional maturity and emotional regulation." Harrison acknowledged Kim's assessment, while maintaining her primary focus on understanding Emma's actual capabilities and potential for further development. "Doctor, what's your professional recommendation regarding advanced training opportunities?" "Ma'am, Miss Carter demonstrates readiness for accelerated development programs, provided they maintain appropriate balance with normal childhood experiences and educational requirements." The professional endorsement from multiple experts provided Harrison with the comprehensive evaluation she needed to make informed decisions about institutional response to exceptional civilian talent that had been identified through unusual circumstances. Colonel Stone had been standing at the periphery of these discussions, recognizing that his confrontational approach to Emma's initial request had been completely undermined by subsequent events. His position required him to address the general directly, despite his growing discomfort about explaining his earlier behavior. "General Harrison," Stone said with forced confidence, "I want to emphasize that base personnel have maintained appropriate safety protocols throughout this demonstration despite the irregular nature of civilian involvement in military training activities." Harrison turned towards Stone with the kind of measuring gaze that experienced flag officers used when evaluating subordinates whose judgment might be questionable. "Colonel, I understand you were initially skeptical about Miss Carter's claimed abilities." The carefully neutral phrasing couldn't disguise Harrison's awareness that Stone had publicly ridiculed Emma before witnessing her exceptional performance. The general's tone suggested that leadership evaluation was occurring alongside assessment of Emma's talents. "Ma'am, My initial response was based on legitimate concerns about safety and appropriate use of military resources. Stone replied with defensive formality. Miss Carter's demonstrated competence has obviously exceeded all expectations. The diplomatic phrasing couldn't conceal the reality that Stone had been fundamentally wrong about Emma's abilities, while demonstrating poor judgment in his treatment of a military family. Harrison's expression indicated that such leadership failures were being noted for future reference. Colonel Harrison said with quiet authority, "Exceptional talent deserves recognition and development regardless of where it's discovered. Ms. Carter's abilities represent exactly the kind of natural capability that our programs are designed to identify and cultivate." Before Stone could respond to what was clearly both guidance and criticism, Harrison turned her attention back to Emma with questions that would determine how the morning's extraordinary events would shape the girl's entire future. "Miss Carter," Harrison said with official authority that made her words carry lasting institutional weight, "would you be interested in advanced marksmanship training that could develop your abilities to their fullest potential?" The question created a moment of profound silence as Emma processed the implications of what was being offered. Michael Carter felt both pride and anxiety about opportunities that could provide his daughter with exceptional training, while potentially separating her from normal childhood experiences. General Emma replied with careful consideration, "I would be honored to receive advanced training, but I want to make sure I can still go to regular school and spend time with my dad." The mature approach to evaluating opportunities impressed Harrison, who recognized that Emma's priorities reflected the kind of balanced thinking that would serve her well in whatever path she chose to pursue. "Miss Carter, the programs we're discussing would supplement, rather than replace, your regular education. We're talking about specialized weekend training and summer programs that would develop your abilities, while maintaining normal family relationships and educational experiences." Michael Carter stepped forward with obvious relief about the balanced approach being proposed. "General, we appreciate the military's interest in Emma's abilities. These programs can help her develop her talents, while keeping her childhood intact. We'd be honored to participate." Harrison's response indicated institutional learning from previous experiences with gifted personnel who had been advanced too rapidly through military systems without adequate support for comprehensive development. "Mr. Carter, our current protocols emphasize mentorship and gradual skill development rather than acceleration that could create adjustment problems. Miss Carter would receive advanced instruction within frameworks that maintain normal educational and social experiences." The clarification about program scope helped everyone understand that institutional interest didn't require immediate life-altering decisions or commitments that would transform Emma's development into something exclusively military in focus. Master Sergeant Blake had been coordinating with base communications to arrange formal documentation of Emma's situation and institutional response that would provide appropriate recognition while protecting family privacy. General Blake said with professional efficiency, "We can establish formal recognition of Miss Carter's achievements while implementing training programs that provide advanced instruction without disrupting her normal development." Harrison nodded approval of the systematic approach to managing exceptional talent within existing institutional frameworks while creating new opportunities that could benefit both individual development and military capabilities. "Miss Carter," Harrison announced with the authority that made her words carry official weight, "the Army is prepared to offer you participation in advanced marksmanship development programs that would provide instruction from elite personnel, while maintaining appropriate educational and social balance." The formal offer represented the culmination of a day that had begun with public humiliation and evolved into institutional recognition at the highest levels of military command. Emma felt the significance of this opportunity settling around her like a mantle that connected her individual achievements to larger purposes: command, Sergeant Major Woods stepped forward with documentation that would provide additional context for understanding Emma's potential contribution to military marksmanship programs. General, I've prepared preliminary training recommendations based on Miss Carter's demonstrated capabilities and her mother's service record. Harrison's obvious interest in expert recommendations reflected institutional commitment to developing exceptional talent through systematic programs rather than ad hoc arrangements that might not provide optimal results. Command Sergeant Major, what's your assessment of appropriate next steps for Miss Carter's development? Ma'am, Miss Carter possesses fundamental skills that typically require months to develop, but she needs exposure to advanced techniques and equipment that aren't available through civilian training programs. I recommend gradual integration into specialized instruction rather than intensive acceleration that could create pressure or unrealistic expectations. The measured approach reflected professional understanding of talent development that emphasized sustainable progress rather than dramatic advancement that might create problems in psychological adjustment or technical consistency. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, Emma found herself surrounded by institutional representatives whose decisions would determine whether her exceptional abilities would be developed through formal programs or remain private skills practiced at civilian ranges on weekends. The gold wings on her collar seemed to catch the changing light, creating reflections that connected her mother's legacy with the opportunities for service that could honor both their sacrifices while allowing her own unique contributions to military excellence. General Harrison studied Emma's face, seeing in the girl's expression the same blend of determination and humility that characterized the finest military personnel throughout history. Emma, Harrison said with a kind of personal authority that transcended rank and position, whatever decisions we make about your future training, the most important thing is that you understand the responsibility that comes with exceptional abilities. Your mother knew that, and I can see you understand it too. The affirmation created emotional connection that bridged institutional requirements with family values while establishing foundation for relationships that would shape Emma's development within military communities that valued both individual excellence and service to objectives larger than personal achievement. 6 months after the morning that Colonel Stone's dismissive laughter echoed across Fort Bragg's headquarters building, the base hosted its first annual Captain Sarah Carter Memorial Marksmanship Competition, drawing elite shooters from military units and civilian organizations nationwide. The autumn North Carolina sun illuminated competitors whose presence validated the installation's growing reputation for excellence while demonstrating how one child's courage to honor her mother's memory had catalyzed improvements that elevated training standards throughout the Army. Emma Carter served as Junior Range Safety Officer for the competition, wearing instructor credentials that reflected comprehensive training and demonstrated competence that impressed visiting professionals who had initially questioned the wisdom of involving civilian personnel in military training programs. Her systematic approach to safety protocols and technical knowledge had earned respect from national-level competitors, who recognized expertise regardless of age or traditional career pathways. The transformation of Fort Bragg's marksmanship facilities reflected institutional investments that had emerged from Emma's situation and the broader recognition that exceptional talent deserved appropriate equipment and training, opportunities for optimal development, advanced targeting systems, environmental monitoring equipment, and expanded training lanes provided capabilities that attracted elite personnel from organizations worldwide. Sergeant Martinez approached Emma's position with obvious pride in her development and appreciation for the learning opportunities her presence had created for everyone involved in range operations. Miss Carter, the Marine Corps team specifically requested to observe your technique during their training session. Your reputation has spread beyond Army circles. Emma felt satisfaction that came from earning professional recognition through demonstrated competence rather than institutional favoritism or family connections. The inter-service attention validated her mother's training methods while establishing her own credibility. Within communities that valued practical results over theoretical credentials. Sergeant Martinez. Emma replied with confident formality she had developed through months of interaction with elite personnel. "I'd be honored to share what my mother taught me. Professional exchange benefits everyone's development." General. Harrison had returned to Fort Bragg to observe the memorial competition and evaluate the long-term implications of integrating exceptional civilian talent into military training programs. Her presence indicated continued Pentagon interest in Emma's development and the broader policies that had emerged from her situation. Miss Carter. Harrison said, as she joined Emma at the range control station, "Your influence on military marksmanship training has exceeded even our most optimistic projections. The protocols developed here are being implemented at installations worldwide." The acknowledgement of systemic impact beyond individual achievement fulfilled Emma's desire to honor her mother's memory through meaningful contribution to military effectiveness and training excellence that would benefit countless personnel throughout their careers. Michael Carter had used the months since Emma's initial demonstration to complete his own advanced instructor certification, enabling him to provide technical support for training programs, while maintaining active involvement in his daughter's development. The family approach to military service had created stronger bonds while honoring Sarah's memory through shared commitment to excellence. Colonel Stone had used the intervening months to implement comprehensive reforms in personnel evaluation and civilian interaction protocols that demonstrated institutional learning from his initial judgment of Emma's capabilities. His leadership during the memorial competition showed professional growth that had emerged from acknowledgement of previous errors and commitment to supporting exceptional talent regardless of its source. "Miss Carter," Stone said with genuine respect as he approached her position, "your presence here has made everyone better. The training improvements that emerged from your situation have elevated our entire program to national standards." The acknowledgement from someone who had initially dismissed her abilities provided closure that validated Emma's decision to demonstrate her skills despite public skepticism and potential humiliation. Professional recognition from former critics represented the most meaningful validation of her mother's training and family heritage. As the memorial competition concluded with ceremonies that celebrated both individual achievement and institutional improvement, Emma found herself surrounded by elite professionals who sought opportunities to learn from her unique background and systematic approach to marksmanship excellence. The ceremonial presentation of awards included establishment of the Captain Sarah Carter Award for Excellence in Marksmanship Training, which General Harrison announced would be presented annually to individuals who demonstrated that talent and dedication transcend traditional boundaries while contributing to military training effectiveness. "This award," Harrison said as she presented the newly established recognition, "honors exceptional civilian contribution to military marksmanship programs and will remind future generations that excellence can emerge from unexpected sources when supported by proper training and institutional flexibility." The establishment of formal recognition in her mother's name provided emotional culmination to Emma's journey from private grief to public service that honored family legacy while contributing to institutional improvement and professional development. As the afternoon sun painted Fort Bragg in golden light, Emma walked with her father toward base housing that had become home in ways that extended beyond physical location into community membership and institutional belonging. "Dad," Emma said quietly as they crossed the parade ground where her journey had begun 6 months earlier, "do you think Mom would approve of what we've accomplished?" Michael considered the question carefully, recognizing that his answer would influence how Emma understood the significance of her achievements and their connection to Sarah's memory and military service. "Emma, Your mother believed that exceptional abilities came with obligations to use them for purposes larger than personal recognition. You've honored her memory by developing your talents in service to others while maintaining the character and values she taught you. Command Sergeant Major Woods joined their conversation with perspective that connected current achievements to military traditions spanning generations of service and sacrifice for objectives beyond individual advancement. Emma, you've demonstrated that individual excellence can create positive change that benefits entire communities while honoring those who came before us. Your mother's legacy lives on through your service and the improvements you've inspired in how the military identifies and develops exceptional talent. The gold wings that Emma wore continued to catch the changing light, but now they represented not just memory of loss, but celebration of continuing service that honored the past, while building foundations for future contributions to military excellence and national security. As they reached their family quarters, Emma paused to look back at the marksmanship range where her extraordinary shooting had shattered assumptions about civilian capabilities while creating opportunities that would benefit countless other young people whose talents deserved recognition and development regardless of traditional pathways. The evening breeze carried sounds of ongoing training activities and professional development that had emerged from one child's courage to request simple access to honor her mother's memory. Emma Carter had transformed personal grief into institutional improvement while establishing herself as someone whose exceptional abilities would continue serving purposes larger than individual achievement throughout whatever future military service awaited her development. Fort Bragg had become more than just a military installation. It represented proof that exceptional talent could emerge from unexpected sources and create positive change that honored the past, while building foundations for continued service to values and objectives that transcended individual recognition or institutional boundaries. The memorial competition had demonstrated that Emma's influence extended far beyond her own remarkable abilities to inspire systematic improvements that would benefit military marksmanship training for generations to come. Her mother's sacrifice had been honored not just through personal achievement, but through lasting contributions to the institution that had shaped their family's service and dedication to something greater than themselves. As the stars appeared over the North Carolina sky, Emma Carter knew that her journey from grieving daughter to nationally recognized instructor represented more than personal triumph. It demonstrated that courage, properly trained abilities, and commitment to honoring those who came before could create positive change that rippled far beyond individual circumstances to benefit entire communities dedicated to service and excellence. The story that had begun with Colonel Stone's dismissive laughter had evolved into a testament to the power of recognizing and nurturing exceptional talent wherever it appeared, regardless of age, background, or conformity to traditional expectations. Emma's legacy would continue inspiring military personnel to look beyond assumptions and provide opportunities for excellence to flourish in service to values larger than individual achievement or institutional convenience. *The End.